Well, so we're happy to close this day with the last talk of Maria Pereira. Is it right? A lot of names. Who will update us on Diophantine equations related to the Fibonacci numbers.
First, I would like to thank you for the opportunity of speaking here. My name is Maria. I am an undergraduate student at UFMG, and today I'll talk about Diophantine equations related to Fibonacci numbers. This was a joint work with Marcos Sosa and Matheus Henrique Lima e Silva. We were supervised by Ana Paula Chaves and Roberto Alvarenga, and this started in a research program at Universidade de São Paulo in January this year. So first, I'll just give an introduction about Diophantine equations and Fibonacci numbers. Then I'll show you some previous results in the subject, and after that, our main theorems. And in the end, I'll give just an idea on how the proof for those theorems looks like. So here we have Diophantus of Alexandria. He was a Greek mathematician who lived in the 3rd century after Christ, and he is considered to be the father of algebra. This is his book, Arithmetica. It's a very important book, and for centuries, this book was our main source on Diophantine equations. That's why we named the equations after Diophantus. And for us, a Diophantine equation is a polynomial equation in which the coefficients and the solutions are integer numbers. Those equations are very famous to figure in problems that are easy to understand but hard to solve. A classical example is the Diophantine equation of Fermat's last theorem. It's just a generalization of the Pythagorean theorem, but it took more than 3 centuries to be solved. And something interesting that I would like to point out is that most people say that Fermat's last theorem states that for n greater or equals 3, we don't have any solutions to this Diophantine equation here, but that's not true. In fact, we have infinite solutions. If I put 0, 1, 1 is a solution. If I put 0, 2, 2 is a solution. But those solutions are not interesting, so we call them trivial. And this leads us to important questions that we have to ask ourselves when dealing with Diophantine equations. The first one is if there is a solution to the Diophantine equation. If the answer is yes, we want to know if there are non-trivial solutions. In the case of Fermat's last theorem, the answer to this second question is no. But if the answer is yes, we want to know if those non-trivial solutions are finite or infinite. And then our main goal is to exhibit all the solutions, then the work will be done. But usually this is very hard to do. So here I have Leonardo of Pisa, as known as Leonardo Fibonacci. He was an Italian mathematician who lived centuries after Diophantus in the medieval era. And he also wrote a very important book called Liber Abaci. And in this page here, he wrote a problem involving rabbits. And the problem goes like this. In January, you have a pair of baby rabbits. From the 2nd month of life on, each pair of rabbits had a new pair of rabbits every month. And we assume that the rabbits never die, so this goes on forever. In this table here, we can see what happened with the number of pair of rabbits. In January, we have 1 pair of baby rabbits. In February, we have 1 pair of adult rabbits. And in March, we have 1 plus 1, 2 pair of rabbits. In April, we have 1 plus 2, 3 pair of rabbits, and so on. So this is what we know today as the Fibonacci sequence. Formally, we define it with initial conditions 0 and 1, and then each term is the sum of the 2 previous ones. Here we have a typo. I wanted to write like Fn plus 2 is equal Fn. I put a minus here, but it's the Fibonacci sequence. And those are the first terms of that sequence. And we say that the Fibonacci sequence has order 2 because to get a new term, we have to remember the 2 previous ones. So we need to have that memory of the 2 previous ones. But we can generalize it to have any order greater than 1 that we want. And to do that, we will add more initial conditions equals to 0. Then we'll define each term to be the sum of the k previous ones. And we call this new sequence k generalized Fibonacci sequence, or just k Bonacci sequence. And of course, if k is equal to, we have the standard Fibonacci sequence. If k is equal to 3, we have the Tribonacci sequence. And here on the Fibonacci sequence, our initial conditions were 0 and 1. And now I'll add one more initial condition equals to 0. Then I can define each term to be the sum of the 3 previous ones. If k is equals 4, we have the Tetranacci sequence. So I'll add one more initial condition equals to 0, and then I'll define each term to be the sum of the 4 previous ones. And I talked about Diophantus of Alexandria, and I talked about Leonardo Fibonacci, but I didn't say what one has to do with the other. And here is where they meet, because this identity is very famous. It states that if I sum the squares of 2 consecutive Fibonacci numbers, I get another Fibonacci number. But we can see it as a Diophantine equation in which the solutions are only Fibonacci numbers. And this identity motivated a lot of studies about other Diophantine equations in which the solutions were Fibonacci numbers. Well, it's natural to ask what would happen if I exchange this exponent 2 here for any other integer greater than 2. Could I get a Fibonacci number in the right for some m? This identity here is true for all m. We want to know if for some m we can have this. And it's also natural to ask what would happen if we, instead of considering Fibonacci number, we consider k Bonacci number. Could we return to the k Bonacci sequence? In 2010, Diego Marques and Alan Tobiguet proved that if this sum here is always a Fibonacci number for m large enough, then S has to be 1 or 2. So here they were investigating that third question that I talked about the non-trivial solutions being finite or infinite. But 1 year later, Florian Luca and Roger Oyono solved completely this Diophantine equation here, and they find out that if S is greater than 2, then we don't have solutions. And when I say that we don't have solutions, I mean non-trivial solutions, because if m is 1, we will always have a solution for every s. And 3 years later, Ana Paula Chaves and Diego Marques solved the k Bonacci case, and they also find out that if k is greater than 2, then this Diophantine equation here has no solutions. And in all those theorems, they only consider consecutive Fibonacci numbers and consecutive k Bonacci numbers. And what we thought was, what would happen if we let the distance between the numbers in the left be greater than 1? What I mean is, like, what would happen if we let this d here be greater than 1? Could I get a Fibonacci number? Or if I keep summing consecutive Fibonacci numbers raised to the power of s, could I return to the Fibonacci sequence? And finally, in the k Bonacci case, what would happen if this d here was greater than 1? Those were the questions that we asked ourselves. And we find out in this case here, this Diophantine equation, it still doesn't have any solutions. If we consider consecutive Fibonacci numbers raised to the power of s, and d is less than m minus 1, then this Diophantine equation here also doesn't have any solution. And finally, in the k Bonacci case, letting the distance be greater than 1. We also don't have any solution for this Diophantine equation. And now I want to talk about the proofs for those theorems, but first I need to talk a little bit about transcendent numbers and linear forms in logarithms. So I say that a complex number is algebraic if it's a root for a polynomial in Q. And if that doesn't happen, I'll say that this complex number is transcendent. And we will denote by Q bar the set of all algebraic numbers. Here I have just a little timeline about transcendent number theory. We consider transcendent number theory have begun in 1844 with an article published by Liouville about bad rational approximation for algebraic numbers. Then in 1973, Hermite proved that E is transcendent, and a few years later, Linderman proved that if alpha is a non-zero algebraic, then E raised to the power of alpha has to be transcendent. And here we got that pi has to be transcendent because of Euler's identity, because if pi is algebraic, we know that I is algebraic, so this product is algebraic, then -1 would be transcendent, and we know that this is not true because -1 is rational. And finally, in the 1900s, Hilbert published a list of open mathematical problems, and the seventh of those problems concerned the transcendence of certain numbers. This problem was solved in 1934 independently by Alexander Gelfand and Theodor Schneider. We also have this corollary here, so if log alpha and log beta are linear independent over Q, we have that they are also linear independent over Q bar. And in 1966, Alan Baker generalized this result. He proved it for any amount of logarithms, and this was a really nice result. He won the Fields Medal for it, and a few years later, he got a lower bound for linear form for the absolute value of linear forms in logarithm, and we also have a free of logarithm version of it, and this was very great. And a few years later, in 2000, a Russian mathematician called Matveev got this lower bound here. And Matveev's theorem is very overwhelmed, but all we need is that if we have an expression like this, we get a lower bound for its absolute value. So what does it have to do with Diophantine equations and Fibonacci numbers? We'll see. This is our first theorem. We want to solve this Diophantine equation here. So here is the Binet formula. I also have a typo here. I'm sorry. Like Fn is equal alpha in minus beta in phi. So alpha is the golden mean, and beta is its algebraic conjugate. And when I apply the Binet formula and do some arithmetic operations, I get this. And using some properties of the Fibonacci sequence, we get this expression here. So this thing here is similar to this in the Matveev theorem. So we can use the Matveev theorem here, and we will get a lower bound for this absolute value. So we get an upper bound for this S here. We get this upper bound for S, but this upper bound is not good. We want a numerical upper bound, and in order to get that, we need to divide the problem in 4 cases. Here I'll solve only case 2, but the solutions are very similar. So in order to solve this case, we need to prove this lemma here. And the proof is very straightforward. It's just to manipulate the left side, and we get something that is clearly less than the right side. And using this lemma, we get an upper numerical bound for S and an upper numerical bound for M plus D. Now, our goal is to get a lower bound. And in order to do that, we will assume that S is greater or equal than 174. Then we are able to show this inequality here that I call inequality 1. This is true if S is greater than 174. And now we can apply Legendre's criterion for continuous fractions. It basically states that if this is gamma, and this is the continuous fractions representation of gamma, and this fraction here I'll call Pt over Qt. So this will be the continuous fractions representation for Pt over Qt. So this guy here is a convergent of the continuous fraction of gamma. And using the upper bound we already have for S, we get that t has to be in between 1 and 69. So at has to be less or equal than 29. And we can use another property of continuous fractions to show this inequality here. I'll call inequality 2. So this here was inequality 1. And when we compare inequality 1 with inequality 2, we get an absurd because this number here is obviously greater than this number here, so S has to be less than 174. And the small cases the computer can calculate and see if there are or there aren't solutions. The proof for the second theorem is very similar. We can apply the Binet formula. Then we use Mathieu's method to get an upper bound for S. Here we will assume that M plus D is greater or equal than 151, and we will use the additional hypothesis that D is less than M minus 1. We get this numerical upper bound for S. Then we assume that S is greater or equal than 19. We use continuous fractions the same way, and we get an absurd, so S has to be less than 19. And again, the small cases the computer can calculate. So the third theorem was a little bit different to prove. Our idea was to show that this sum here is always in between those two consecutive Fibonacci numbers. So it can't be a Fibonacci number because it's always in between two consecutive ones. And in order to show that, we proved this lemma here. And this formula is true for all A in this interval. And we also have this well-known inequality. We wanted to use that, but we need something more close. So we proved this lemma here. Both of those lemmas we proved by induction, and we proved those lemma here. And here is just a graph. This was the well-known bound. So this is, in green, is alpha raised to the power of m minus 1. In orange, I have alpha raised to the power of n minus 2. And in blue, we have the Fibonacci numbers. And here is our bound. So in green, we have this bound here. In orange, we have this bound here. And in blue, we have the Fibonacci numbers. So using those two lemmas, we were able to show that this sum here is always in between these two consecutive Fibonacci numbers. And here is just a survey of the Diophantine equations in this presentation. So here is Fibonacci's identity. Florian Luca and Roger Oyono generalize it, and we generalize it letting the distance between the Fibonacci numbers in the left be greater than 1, and also keeping summing consecutive Fibonacci numbers raised to the power of s. And from Fibonacci's identity, we also have Chavez and Marquis theorem, and we generalize it letting the distance between the Fibonacci numbers be greater than 1. And that was it. This is Roberto, Marcos, Mateus, me, and Ana. And thank you.